Eyes aghast, clarify, whose ghost? Spy out after the event, the thing meant, unmeant. Sing what draws the eye's belief. Bucket water black bunched, the heron's balanced brief, the worm's cankerous ring.
Welcome, my name is Natasha Cuddington. I'm a poet and I'm here with a little grouping from Macha Press, a new publishing venture that we've embarked on, including our first poet, Eilish Martin. Kathleen?
Hi, yes, I'm Kathleen McCracken, poet and academic, and I'm on the editorial board of Macha Press.
I'm Eilish Martin. I'm here today with my publication, Alarme and What If Not. I'll be reading some poems from this book later in the conversation.
And Kathleen, I just want to start with this idea of, you're introducing yourself, but then also this notion of teasing out for an audience what Macha Press is as an organization.
I'm part of the Macha Press editorial board. And to say a little bit to begin with about how we started, the initiative began really in January 2024. It was your brainchild, Natasha. I think we owe the inception, the origin of it to you. But we are a collective, a team of 8 now poets, including, and I would like to name them all, apart from ourselves, we have Ruth Carr, Siobhan Campbell, Lorna Shaughnessy, and a couple of younger poets as well. We have Alana Offield and Milena Williamson, and Shannon Kuta Kelly, all of whom are recent PhD graduates.
Yes.
And we have a financial advisor, Mary Kelly.
Yes.
Our aim, I think, is to try to publish poetry that might not get published elsewhere, because we're interested in poetry that is adventurous and innovative, challenging, what we might call binaries or dichotomies, that is conventional, traditional approaches to the publishing and writing and publishing of poetry.
Publishing really, I think, is a very vulnerable and difficult place, and we're quite conscious that we don't want any one person to be kind of deformed by that practice. But this idea then, following on, that we all as individual poets wanted to create conditions that were more conducive to people taking risks, to experimentation, but then also publishing something in a way that we would want our work to be honored, in physical terms, yes?
Yes, indeed, yes. And I think one of the things we're very interested in at Macha is the book as object.
Yes.
And that's not to discount in any way what the book has to say in terms of meaning or content, but we want the book itself to be an artwork, insofar as we can allow it to be, with budgets being what they are, etc. But the visuality, the physicality of the book is important to us.
I think Macha as a sort of notion or principle really came to us through Ruth Carr. And it's, one of these sort of areas of slippage, we understand her to be a figure, who's very central to the Ulster cycle, a kind of goddess that we, that slips, between different traditions, and then also resounds with all this other kind of cultural matter as well. And I just wanted to ground the idea of Macha as a kind of, as an abiding principle with a quote from Kieran Carson, if that works. Does that work? Yeah, okay. So, we've had all kinds of research, and very early, Mary Montague gave us a beautiful précis for the website, sort of bringing Macha in, but just this notion from the Tyne or the Ton, dependent on your pronunciation, something from Carson's translation of the Cattle Raid of Cooley. 2 women named Macha, which as an impersonal noun can mean either an enclosure for milking cows or a plain, are associated with the founding of the fortress. The lesser known concerns Macha the Queen, who marks out the perimeter of the fort with her brooch, hence the folk etymology Owain, usually meaning twins. The better known legend concerns Macha the wife of a rich Ulster landlord. At a fair, he boasts that his pregnant wife can run faster than the king's chariot and horses. She races the chariot, and as it reaches the end of the field, she gives birth to twins alongside it. Hence, Owen Macha, Macha's twins, nowadays associated with Navan Fort. And I think we're really embracing all of these sort of areas, you know, and permutations of Macha, but principally this idea of taking new areas or perimeters, you know, marking new boundaries, and also, I think, probably scratching out these little territories in our own practices, with the brooch.
I like the idea that it's an open plane, you know, that there's space there as there is kind of visually space in our books for innovation and departures.
Absolutely.
Pushing the boundaries, all that.
And this idea of the place as a field, you know, the page as a field, the place as a field, and there's this kind of opening or extending of boundaries.
And the echo too, I suppose, in the word Macha of the Scottish Macher, which means poet, that brings it back to our endeavour as well.
Absolutely, yes. Eilish, did that kind of, when that principle came in, do you know, as a kind of, you know, a thinking about our endeavour, did it resound with, you know, was there something in it that was meaningful to you as a poet?
Oh, I love the whole idea of the project. You know, the idea of the book as a visual object, a beautiful, crafted piece of work, appealed to me, being somebody who liked to work with materials, and you know, immediately, you know, sort of I thought, you know, so this is something I want to be part of, and also the way that you invited the poet into the process of making the book, every little detail, the size of the book, the type of the paper, the typeface, the colour of the whites would complement one another. All of that was, you know, exciting for me, and I was delighted to be part of the whole process.
We have this editorial grouping, yes, who are, you know, who have such a huge range of sort of practice and acumen, you know, in their own right, and, you know, professional kind of accolades. But then we got into this area of, designer, foundational kind of visual matter. And right away, for me, it was Sophie Herxheimer who came to mind, because this is somebody who is working, you know, at this intersection of design with her collage work and her visual, her broad visual arts practice. And then she works as a jobbing poet. And so to bring her in then, Kathleen, to consult on that additional matter. Yeah.
It was wonderful to have those conversations with her and see the different designs she came up with, the different colophones she presented us with, the colour palette. It was really collaborative. I mean, those meetings involved everybody on the board, in the team, so that, you know, it wasn't like she was just saying, here's what I've done and you're going to use this. And it was great to have those really deep background conversations about what the colour palette should be.
Yes.
And how the you know, the name, as you can see there, the colophon, the images would work with our ideas of who Macha was and what we represented or wanted to represent. In several of Sophie Herxheimer's designs to accompany Macha publications, it's a double-headed horse, and the horse is one of Macha's attributes, but we wanted it double-headed and triple-legged, as it appears, to represent the twinness, the twins that she gives birth to, and also the twin books, the double books per year, 2 books per year that we'll be publishing. And the idea also of different languages, double languages, translations, present and past texts. The emerging and the established poets. So there's thinking behind our colophon.
Yeah, for me, just getting those like first touches right, you know, getting all the foundational matter sorted so that we have a moving template, yes? And then there was this beautiful moment, and you've mentioned, Julian, where we went through a small grouping of designers, and you had initiated contact with Julian.
Julian Menev, yes, who is an architect and designer.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, his work has been phenomenal, as you've mentioned. Eilish, he just seemed to have a very intuitive sense of what we needed and wanted. And even when we might have wanted things that were kind of pie in the sky, he would bring you down to earth, but still retain that elegance that we were after.
Yes.
So I think we're very, very fortunate in having him as the designer. The two together, Sophie and Julian, have been the backbone really of the design of the books.
And maybe Kathleen, just before we bring Eilish in to really talk about her practice, this idea of what we're hoping to achieve, year to year or moving forward, and then maybe some of our principles around how we're organizing financially, just so people are aware.
Yeah, we're aiming to publish 2 books per year.
Yeah.
One by an established writer, such as Eilish herself, and another by an emerging writer. So 2 per year, ideally one in the autumn and one in the spring. As well as that, we may alternate with one of those publications with either a translated collection, a work in translation, or what we might call a recovered work,
yes.
A work that has historically been lost or missed out or forgotten, that otherwise might not be preserved.
Yes.
So that's the agenda, 2 publications per year. We're financing through subscriptions and through supporting donations at the moment. So
yes.
You can find out how to go about supporting us that way if you go to our website, which is www.machapress.com.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Eilish, it would be lovely to talk, maybe to introduce yourself and maybe just talk more broadly about your practice and across the last 10 years. And, there's so much for us to discuss.
Natasha invited me to present work to the editorial board, and I had 3 long poems which I considered good enough for consideration. So out of those 3 poems, 2 of them were decided upon, and they turned out to be Alarme and What If Not. These are long poems written in fragmented form, and they complement very much the way the book developed itself in the making, and because the book itself is a tête bêche, which means a head-to-toe book. So what you have is twin poems which weave into one another. They are not identical poems, but they weave beautifully one into the other, and they are presented in such a way that you have one that opens in that way, then you turn it upside down and it opens in the other way, head to toe, which again I find a lovely way to present my work. But I'd like to say something about the books that I make as part of my art practice. I have been making these concertina books over the last number of years, collaging and printing in order to complement visual and words as an art piece. And the exhibition which ran alongside the launch of the book, which was called Sing What Draws the Eye's Belief, shows these books in the making, and also the exhibition complements a lot of what this particular book of poetry is all about. The ink drawings, there's a piece where it's a very colourful indigenous type of artwork, which almost comes across as illuminated manuscript. So everything within the exhibition in some way weaves into the making of words in print matter, and it's been a wonderful experience seeing the book and the art exhibition working alongside one another. For many years I've been reading the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, and then some years back I came across her collected and new poems published by Harcourt. Mm-hmm. And as you do when you get to the end of the collection, I started to read the index page, and that to me sort of nipped at something in my imagination, and I thought, this nearly reads like a poem itself. And I love the idea of the flow of the alphabet, sort of cascading down through the end pages. And I started a little playful exercise of making a poem out of these lines in different forms, and then bit by bit I found that I was being sort of taken on a different type of journey where my own voice was starting to resonate very much with Szymborska's lines, and then eventually finding its own register and its own concerns, and it became an expressive poem on that level, still incorporating lines from Szymborska, but on for the most part lines of my own, responding to or deviating totally, diverging totally from Szymborska's concerns. Eventually, because of the constraints that you have to feel with regards to somebody else's work, the lines that I borrowed from Szymborska or were loaned to me by Szymborska were removed from the work, but not made totally invisible. By an inspired sort of move on the part of the editors, we came upon the idea that we could indicate where those lines had been without actually using them. And so the initial letters were ghosted in a grayscale, and then the space was empty after that on the line. Where words from Szymborska, which were not necessarily index lines, appeared in the poems, they were indicated as open brackets with nothing, empty brackets.
I think we'd probably like to hear one or two of the poems that fall under one of the letters, you know, the index that you're telling us about.
Well, yeah, I'll start with the first poem in the Alarme section sequence, and it begins with the only line of Szymborska that appears in total in the book. It's in again a beautiful grayscale attributed to the poet, again alongside the line, and it begins, this is the letter A, it begins, "A dead beetle lies on the path through the field. Alder lifest, alongside a worm, curled amoret. Ascending, descending angels, you are mocking my poem against an angry day. Above its mountains and valleys, anthems of war. Although a girl awaits the return of her lover, an apple in her pocket, and he, a raven on his shoulder, approaching in tatters." And this is the D fragment. "Deliver yourself to crossing over. Deep is the water, dark is the deep. Dear earthbound, don't be downhearted. Dozens have gone before, dewdrops in a cobweb hung. Doubtless some have been dear to you. Drink this drop of forgetfulness. Doom is non-negotiable. Ah, dear soul, the dead have unremembered you."
Wonderful. So, Eilish, it's really interesting, and I don't want to move you on too quickly from the Szymborska, but this idea that what we have is the trace of the original kind of impetus of the work, which was a conversation, which has then become its own, in its in its own right, your material. This
Yeah.
idea that there's a kind of feedback happening with the original text, which has
Yeah.
then been rubbed back. And I think, you know, for us, Kathleen, this notion of the kind of the excitement around something that might have evolved out of a response, but then moves into its own territory.
Yeah, I think in a very broad sense, what your work, that particular poem, points towards is the way that influence or origin point always retains a trace
Yes.
in our work.
Yes.
It's an acknowledgement that we speak out of one another, or we
Yes.
respond to one another
Yeah.
as poets.
Mm-hmm.
There's the acknowledgement of that ghost is there,
Yeah.
and yet it's entirely your own work. Just that the indicator of the capital letter that's grayed out
Yes.
is like an arrow pointing to, well, this is where I began, but here's where I've completed the work. And in that way, I think it speaks to all of us quite elegantly.
On the page, again, it enhances the whole design process.
Yes.
Because it's a beautiful looking piece
Yes.
of work. You know, when you see the grayscale,
Yes.
the empty lines, the the brackets
Yeah.
that somehow speak volumes.
Absolutely. There's no question, and I think really preferences the alphabet, you know, in this notion of the abecedarian or alphabetic work. And I think that in my mind, you know, we haven't talked about this inner matter of the book yet, which is really the focus of the exhibition. And this notion that the alphabet is being so prominent in those typographical sculptures that we featured. And, you know, just for the audience, this notion that we felt as a press as the most meaningful way of supporting Eilish's work was not to sort of trot her out in the regular literary context, although that's coming, but Kathleen initiated a conversation with the University of Ulster, yes, and then we went in to see Cherie Driver, yes, about the ways in which we might sort of show or append Eilish's, you know, the poetry with examples of her visual material.
Yeah, so that the ABCDarium, I can never say that word, right?
ABCDarium,
Yeah, that's in the center of Eilish's book. It's, you know, the whole alphabet with beautiful conceptual kind of responses to each letter is there in the exhibition, at the heart of the exhibition.
Then, because I was lucky enough to have boxes of letraset in the house,
Yes.
and because I'm interested in creating visual images,
Yes.
I then thought, well, this is what I can do. I'll start making sculptures out of the letters of the alphabet.
Yes.
And that went hand in glove with the working through of the poem.
Absolutely, and then feeding back to the other sequence in the book, which is also kind of remixed in those accordion sort of style
Yes.
books and other objects. And I think, you know, it comes to a really interesting kind of principle. We were asked recently, and we focused a lot on the kind of book as object and the materiality of the text and the kind of terms in which you're improvising. But I think it is important for us to regard also perhaps maybe what we might call lyric fragments. In the second area of long poem, you know, what your poetry is about, if it is about any. You know, this question that comes to everybody, just to open for an audience that might expect sort of narrative drive or, you know, these more traditional or legible aspects of poetic form. I mean, that's, if we were to talk about what it's about. Kathleen and Eilish, do you intuitions?
For me, reading Eilish's poems is not so much about, you know, a journey from A to Z, although it is, in a certain literal sense, an A to Z with your ABCDarium there. But it's more about, again, appreciating the visual field of it, the sound of it, the orality of the poem, and drawing our attention as readers, again, to the materiality, but the way that punctuation works, the way that fragmentation works.
Yes.
The way that spaces work and the breath in relation to the way that the poem is set on the page. It's a bit like looking at the Pompidou Centre, you know, the inside is outside, the mechanics of it have been drawn, attention has been drawn to the mechanics of the work. And I think that's challenging for readers, but I also think it makes us appreciate poetry in another sense. There's prosody there, there's a musicality there that speaks in a different language than we're perhaps accustomed to in lyric or narrative poetry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Eilish, one other note that you might want to sort of, maybe highlight or focus in for us is this notion, because I'm thinking about perception, attention, and, haiku has been raised, not only by yourself, but by Kathleen and in my intuitions about the way the work moves. And, we talked about at readings of yours, the context of haiku. There was, I can't remember the name of the critic. It may have been Hiroaki Sato. There's somebody that I was reading recently about haiku that was suggesting that what we think of as a loss of confession in haiku, because it's so focused on image and immediacy, is actually not a loss of subjectivity, but it's absolute pure subjectivity. It's we're right beside the poet's perception. And, and so in some respects, even though it doesn't it feels as though it wants to eschew poet, it's in fact right beside the poet. And that's one of the things that I think about when I think about your work. Is that something that you were conscious of when you were making that material? That we are deep in your moment?
Well, in the second long poem, And What If Not, I think that resonates very much with my own feeling about that poem, because I came to writing that what turned out to be a longer poem. Didn't realize at the time that it was one long poem. I came to write that out of a different type of writing. My other two collections had been poems where I reflected on past experiences, people, places, whereas I felt an urgent sort of need to travel on from that place into a place of a more interior desire to be of the moment, be of the now, be of the here, and work through that type of, as you were saying, subjectivity. So yes, it was very much, sort of an intention to move away from a different type of lyrical poetry into another type of expressive poem, because I am of the outside. I'm not an academic. I'm not sort of in the company of a lot of practicing poets a lot of the time, and I'm sort of feeling my way, sort of in the dark sometimes, with lots of interesting little sort of segues here and there, and enjoying myself greatly, because at the sort of at the base of all of this for me was a sort of a playful type of engagement.
Absolutely.
With the work,
yes.
And I wanted to sort of give it a certain amount of freedom to see where it can bring me.
Wonderful.
And what I could actually live with, and this is something that sort of which recurs over and over again, sort of in my practice. I get to the point of a sort of revelation, as it were, and I think, my goodness, how did I get to this point? This is something that has revealed itself to me.
Yes.
I started off, sort of with a particular idea, very, very embryonic sort of idea, and eventually, sort of it developed and told me, sort of how it wanted to develop on the page.
Wonderful.
And then, it's a lovely way to work, to be able to sort of say that I've had a great morning this morning. All in all, given the tenure of slaughter, the bare fact of slaughter, consider perhaps the far shadowing spear aslant the singing air, and or the bare moon, its frontier margins of imperfect fracture amassing a far shore. How moon and spear undo the heart's perimeter, its binding architecture, its is-was puff of error, enough to know of fear in the word for spear, enough of doom in the word for moon.
To wrap up, just to say that Eilish's book is available now from local independent bookshops and through our website, www.machapress.com, and we would encourage you to subscribe or be a supporter for the press.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for being with us today, Eilish. It's been wonderful to hear your work aired in this context. And thank you so much, Kathleen, also for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you.